Welcome back to Warfare Report, your go-to channel for in-depth military analysis. Today, we're diving into a critical topic that's shaping global naval dynamics in 2026, the decline of the Russian Navy and how the United States is asserting dominance through high seas boarding operations on tanker ships. I'm your host, and in this episode, we'll explore the historical roots of Russia's naval power, the factors accelerating its downfall, and the tactical prowess of U.S. forces in intercepting sanctioned vessels. This isn't just about ships. It's about shifting power balances, economic warfare, and the future of maritime security. Let's get started. To understand the Russian Navy's current predicament, we must first look back at its storied past. The Russian Navy, or Voенно-Morskoy Flot, traces its origins to the late 17th century under Peter the Great, who envisioned a fleet to project Russian influence across the seas. By the 20th century, during the Soviet era, it had become a formidable force. The Cold War saw the Soviet Navy expand dramatically, boasting nuclear submarines, aircraft carriers like the Kuznetsov, and a blue water capability that rivaled the United States in scope and ambition. At its peak in the 1980s, the Soviet fleet included over 1,400 vessels, including ballistic missile submarines that formed the backbone of mutually assured destruction. Operations in the Mediterranean, Atlantic, and Pacific demonstrated Moscow's global reach. The Navy wasn't just a defensive tool. It was an instrument of power projection, supporting allies in Cuba, Vietnam, and Syria. Iconic moments, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, highlighted its strategic importance. However, the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked the beginning of a long slide. Budget cuts, corruption, and industrial decay led to the decommissioning of hundreds of ships. By the early 2000s, the fleet had shrunk to a shadow of its former self, with many vessels rusting in ports due to lack of maintenance. Vladimir Putin's rise brought promises of revival, with investments in hypersonic missiles and new submarines like the Bore class. Yet, as we'll see, these efforts have fallen short amid modern challenges. Fast forward to 2026, and the Russian Navy is grappling with a perfect storm of issues. First and foremost is the ongoing war in Ukraine, which has decimated the Black Sea Fleet. Since 2022, Ukrainian drones, missiles, and asymmetric tactics have sunk or damaged over a third of Russia's Black Sea vessels, including flagships like the Moskva cruiser. The fleet's relocation to safer ports like Novorossiysk hasn't stemmed the losses. Recent reports from 2025 indicate continued attrition from Ukrainian strikes. Logistical and maintenance woes compound this. Russian shipyards, hampered by sanctions, face delays in delivering new vessels. The ambitious development strategy for the Navy to 2050, approved by Putin in May 2025, aims for modernization, but execution is faltering. For instance, the Admiral Kuznetsov carrier, once a symbol of prestige, was scrapped in 2025 after years of costly repairs and a devastating fire. Submarine fleets are aging, with incidents like the 2025 tsunami damaging bases and Ukrainian intelligence allegedly stealing nuclear sub-plans. Economically, Russia's dependence on oil exports funds its military, but Western sanctions have forced reliance on a shadow fleet of aging, uninsured tankers. This fleet, often flagged under dubious registries, evades price caps but exposes vulnerabilities. NATO reports from October 2025 note a waning Russian presence in the Mediterranean as resources shift to the Baltic and high north. The loss of the Tartus base in Syria following the Assad regime's fall in December 2024 was a massive blow, evicting Russian forces and limiting warm water access. Moreover, systemic constraints are evident. Years of warfare have ravaged personnel. Crews are overworked, and recruitment lags. Investments, like the 8.4 trillion ruble plan announced in 2025, prioritize submarines and Arctic operations, but surface fleets suffer. Analysts from Nikki in August 2025 highlight Russia's growing strategic dependence on China, with whispers of Beijing supplying or even building ships for Moscow. This shift underscores a navy in retreat, focused on defense rather than offense. Let's examine specific examples from 2025-2026 that illustrate this decline. In August 2025, Euromaidan Press reported a triple blow. The Kuznetsov decommissioned, natural disasters hitting submarine bases, and espionage losses. The fleet's inability to protect Arctic routes, where oil and ammunition ships now disappear into evasive maneuvers, shows desperation. Defense News in October 2025 observed Moscow straining to maintain Mediterranean patrols, redirecting assets northward. Delays in the updated shipbuilding program, finalized in December 2025, reveal internal discontent. TASS reported ongoing work, but sources indicate logistical bottlenecks and communication failures. The British Royal Navy's own challenges pale in comparison. While the UK plans a hybrid fleet by 2027, Russia's ambitions for 2050 seem aspirational at best. Critically, the Navy's impotence is glaring in protecting economic interests. Shadow fleet tankers, vital for bypassing sanctions, operate without escort, vulnerable to interception. This leads us to the U.S. side of the equation, where American forces are capitalizing on these weaknesses. Shifting gears, the United States Navy remains the world's preeminent maritime force, with 11 carrier strike groups, advanced submarines, and global reach. In contrast to Russia's decline, the USN excels in expeditionary operations, including visit, board, search, and seizure, VBSS missions. These are elite tactics used to enforce sanctions, combat piracy, and intercept illicit cargo. VBSS involves specialized teams, often from Navy SEALs, Marines, or Coast Guard maritime security response teams, deploying via helicopters or small boats. Operations begin with intelligence gathering. Satellites, drones, and allied tips track targets. Once located, a warship like an Arleigh Burke destroyer approaches, issuing warnings via radio. If non-compliant, boarding commences under cover of darkness or poor weather for surprise. Key to success is coordination. Helicopters insert teams onto decks, while snipers provide overwatch. Teams secure the bridge, engine room, and crew quarters searching for contraband. Safety is paramount. Tanker boardings risk fires from volatile cargo, so protocols include fire suppression and hazmat gear. Legal authority stems from UN resolutions, US sanctions, or bilateral agreements, ensuring compliance with international law like UNCLOS Article 110. In 2026, these tactics are honed against Venezuelan and Russian-linked tankers, evading sanctions on oil exports. Recent events provide stark examples. On January 7, 2026, U.S. forces seized the Russian-flagged Marinera, formerly a Venezuelan tanker, in the North Atlantic after a weeks-long pursuit. ABC News reported aviation assets from the UK aiding the operation, with boarding teams overcoming resistance. This followed a surge of 16 sanctioned tankers fleeing Venezuelan waters, most heading east. Just days later, on January 9th, Fox News detailed a pre-dawn boarding in the Caribbean, seizing another tanker. U.S. Southern Command announced the action, part of 5 interceptions that month. Videos from USCG show teams fast roping from helicopters, securing vessels amid rough seas. One incident involved Russian naval escorts attempting interference, but U.S. superiority deterred. Escalation. These operations target Venezuela's Maduro regime, accused of funding terrorism via oil sales to Iran and Russia. The Trump administration's escalation, including 10,000 troops and 10% of the Navy in the region, underscores resolve. Bloomberg and the War Zone report relentless pursuits, with seizures disrupting billions in illicit trade. Russia's inability to protect these assets, due to its stretched fleet, highlights the decline. In one case, a Russian warship shadowed but backed off per NYT. Comparisons to historical boardings, like against Iranian tankers in 2020, show evolution. Drones now provide real-time intel, reducing risks. These successes bolster U.S. deterrence, pressuring adversaries economically. The Russian Navy's decline has profound implications. A weakened fleet limits Moscow's power projection, ceding influence in key regions like the Mediterranean and Arctic. Dependence on China for naval support signals a multipolar shift, but it also exposes vulnerabilities. Beijing may not always align with Russian interests. For the U.S., boarding operations demonstrate maritime supremacy, enforcing sanctions without full-scale conflict. However, risks abound. Escalations with Russian escorts could spark incidents, and environmental hazards from tanker spills loom large. Globally, this erodes trust in Russian alliances as partners like Venezuela face isolation. In a broader context, NATO benefits from Russia's waning presence, allowing focus on China. Yet as Nikki notes, Russia's shrinking navy reveals systemic rot, accelerating its strategic retreat. For global security, this means heightened tensions in choke points like the Strait of Hormuz or Caribbean, where U.S. actions fill the void. In summary, the Russian Navy's decline, from historical powerhouse to a force plagued by losses, delays, and dependencies, is undeniable in 2026. The war in Ukraine, sanctions, and internal failures have accelerated this, leaving Moscow unable to safeguard vital assets like its shadow fleet. Conversely, U.S. boarding operations exemplify tactical excellence, disrupting illicit oil flows and asserting dominance. These actions not only weaken adversaries economically, but also underscore the shifting naval balance. As we wrap up, remember, naval power isn't just about numbers. It's about capability and will. Russia struggles with both, while the U.S. thrives. If you enjoyed this analysis, hit like, subscribe to Warfare Report, and turn on notifications for more military insights. What do you think? Can Russia reverse its naval fortunes? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, stay informed